Isn't it so hypocritical when your therapist is married, has a family, has 14 dogs, has their own method of self-regulating with other things, tells you that you need to learn how to self-regulate by yourself and figure it out? How are you going to love someone else if you can't fill your own cup? But meanwhile, they're being loved by their mom, dad, cousin, friend, brother, who knows what. So no one is really ever able to fill their own cup. The myth of learning to self-regulate is like the myth in capitalism of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. It's very similar. It's like this emotional myth that people can learn to self-regulate, and it's simply not true. Self-soothing is actually a myth created by people to justify their isolation. Telling someone that they need to self-soothe and learn how to emotionally regulate themselves is a bullshit excuse for the fact that someone else cannot be present for them. If parents didn't have to run off to work and abandon their kids, if boyfriends and girlfriends could actually be there for their partners, if husbands and wives could actually be a daily participant in each other's lives, they wouldn't have to say, hey, maybe you need to work on self-soothing. And then when people do want to seek connection, we blame them for being codependent and too enmeshed. And then we say, hey, you're not embracing the American dream of being an individual if you don't want to be pro-social, extroverted, an individual who knows how to self-soothe and emotionally regulate themselves. You know where self-soothing is the most popular? On the internet. Because you know where people are most alone? On the internet. And you know what's the biggest consolation prize for being alone? That you need to learn to self-soothe. You know what I hear the most often? Professor, therapist, person, can you teach me how to self-soothe so I don't need anyone else in my life? Can you teach me how to be more independent and learn to not be so codependent? Can you please show me the way of how I can learn to self-soothe and not need anyone else? Can you please teach me how to be happy by myself and not rely on other people for validation? Can you teach me how to regulate my own emotions without relying on someone else? And the biggest disappointment I have to say is that I can't. Is that every time you think you're self-soothing, you're actually just simulating someone else being there for you. Even saying, hey, next time you're upset, talk to yourself with kindness. Well, you're just imagining next time you're alone that you're with somebody who's more kind. So you're actually simulating being with someone else. If you go to an Instagram post and it says, hey, I see you out there struggling. I see what you're doing. I validate the thing you're doing. I appreciate you. You were feeling validated by the fact that someone else is out there talking to you. And it feels like you're hearing someone else talk to you. If you self-soothe by focusing on your 5 senses, such as what's something to look at, something to taste, touch, or feel, you're activating the feeling of not being alone by looking at something else. So getting out of your solipsistic feeling of being alone and attached to something else. For instance, when I self-soothe by walking around and being in nature, I feel less alone because I'm with the trees. I'm not actually learning how to be by myself. When I learn how to self-soothe by writing in my journal, I'm not learning how to be alone. I'm learning how to talk to myself more compassionately, so I feel like I'm not by myself. When you go to a therapist to learn how to be more resilient, independent, you're hanging out with somebody who helps you feel less alone. I argue that the only person who can actually modify and change their own emotions is a sociopath. Unless you have an antisocial personality disorder, you need someone else in your life to help you co-regulate. And even if you don't, you need to simulate that someone else is there to help you co-regulate. At no point is self-soothing, learning how to have emotion regulation skills ever something you do individually. The whole point of the process is actually not only are you utilizing other people to help you self-soothe, but even when you're doing something by yourself, you're actually talking to different parts of yourself and simulating what it feels like to help and be with someone else. The myth becomes, if you can't learn to self-regulate, there's something wrong with you and you have a personality disorder because you lack self-direction and a sense of self that's not attached to someone else. The truth is, everyone's attached to someone else. Everyone has deep-rooted connections. Most people find a way to healthily deal with it. Some people feel so alone and schismed and lonely that's the only way they can deal with things is interacting with someone in really intense ways. But that's not proof that the reason you're not loved is because you can't self-regulate. So please don't fall for that bullshit anymore.